So it is as if we never left. So welcome to week three, third lesson, or week six sometimes in the slide. And today we're going to talk, in this lecture, we're going to talk about crafting your claims for significance. This is a very important section, just like the first two, and I hope you'd bear with me. As I said, welcome to Crafting Your Claims for Significance. This lecture marks a crucial turning point in your journey towards publication. You'll learn how to articulate why your research matters, not just to you, but to the broader scholarly community. By mastering claims for significance, you'll transform your article from a solid piece of work into a compelling contribution reviewers cannot ignore. Let's look at your writing tasks for this week. 1. Deep reading. Spend 60 to 90 minutes reading, filling in boxes, answering questions as you go. 2. Article exchange. Exchange your article with another scholar and complete the so what does it mean, exercise. Day 3, draft and insert your claims for significance. And day 4 and 5, revise your articles based on the feedback. Before you begin, it's important to schedule. If you're working with others, schedule your article exchange, allowing a full 2 hours for reading and also for discussion. I'll leave this between you and among yourselves to decide who you exchange the article with. If you're working individually, reach out to a colleague to discuss your claims, or use this week to catch up and return later. Remember, sharing your writing is essential for publication success. Regular exchange helps you prepare for peer review and sharpen your ability to explain your work. But let's reflect first on the week and the previous weeks. By now, you've built routines, refined arguments, selected journals, and now strengthened, and this previous lecture strengthened your citations. But if you're not seeing progress, remember the writing process isn't simply linear. So it's okay if you're not following yet, as long as you are moving forward. Okay? Peter Elbow reminds us that the model of rigid control in writing, like outlining, planning, and never wavering, often leads to frustration. Real writing is flexible, it is recursive, it is developmental. So allow yourself to explore, allow yourself to revise, and allow yourself to circle back. It's a normal process. More importantly, it's very important to see also that you are adapting yourself. That's why you need to give yourself permission to adapt, no? If structure works for you, stick with it. But if you're stuck, change it up. Read, revise, and follow your curiosity. Adapting your plan is not self-deception. More often than not, it is self-knowledge. So go on, just adapt yourself the way you feel. So why claims for significance matter? No? Why does this matter at all? Even strong articles can fail if they don't clearly state why they matter. Top journals reward authors who assert their work's importance boldly. Research shows that aggressive wording, terms like novel, unprecedented, innovative, has actually skyrocketed in the past 40 years. So, this is very important because it allows you to argue why the paper is important. Your argument, so what is the difference between your argument and your claims for significance? Uh, your argument answers, what are you saying? Your claims for significance answers, why should even anyone care? Both are very essential because an argument without significance fails to engage readers. Significance without argument, on the other hand, lacks grounding. So, arguments and claims for significance actually work together and they actually work hand in hand. So if you're feeling if you're so that you have to pay attention why they are why they matter, huh? And why they are important. So if your article feels uninspiring, ask yourself, why should readers care? When you find that answer, your writing comes alive. Even experienced authors ask how to sell their work. It's about identifying and communicating their claims for significance. So, if you have this blah feeling, it's okay. It's okay. No? So, what exactly is a claim for significance? Every reader asks the question, so what? That's what they ask. So what? So what? If you're writing a paper about this, so what? That's every reader asks that. And your claim for significance is your answer to the so what. It's the reason your article deserves to be read, how it benefits, challenges, or enlighten other. It reasons your article why it matters. And that's the reason why this is important. Now, a more complex definition. Gordon Harvey calls it motive. The reason a real person would find your article interesting. It's not what motivated you to write, it's what motivates others to read. That's why it's a question of motive. Uh, if you'd notice, I'm not explaining everything line by line, no? Giving you the option to also spare time to read the slides. Okay? Now, there are three essential elements in your introduction. Take a stand, which means state your argument. Relate your to scholarship, which is show your entry point. And show it matters, your claim for significance. How may this may overlap? We know that to be a fact already, but all three must appear at least in the introduction, which is the first few paragraphs of your paper. As early as the first few paragraphs, this should have been a done deal already. And therefore, something you should already have done. Took a stand related to scholarship, showed that the paper matters. Now, there are 10 types of claims for significance. 10, yes. There are 10 core types of claims: subject-based, audience-based, literature-based, practice-based, method-based, findings-based, disciplinary, theory-based, implication-based, and recommendation-based. Let's explore each of these in turn. Let's begin first with subject-based claim. These explain why your subject, person, group, or problem matters, especially effective if it's overlooked or extreme. No? Second, audience-based claims. Appeal to a specific audience, scholars, policymakers, practitioners, and show why they should care. Next, literature-based claims. Identify a gap or correction in existing scholarship. This is your entry point into the conversation, and therefore something that connects it to the earlier discussion on literature, and that's where it will matter a lot. Next, practice-based claim. This shows how your article affects real-world practices and understanding. Next, methods-based claim. This highlights new or powerful methods, frameworks, or key terms that reveal something new. Next, findings-based claim. Assert that your results shed new light or shift understanding. Seventh, disciplinary or field-based claims. Show how your work strengthens or advances your discipline. 8. Theory-based claims. These present new or improved ways of thinking about systems or ideas. 9. Implications-based claims that reveal your writings' broader consequences, whether positive or problematic. And lastly, recommendation-based claims, which offer practical or research-based recommendations for change or further study. So choose which claim for significance you want to make. So claims for significance should actually be placed early. So always include where to place the claims for significance, always include them early, especially in the introduction, and you can echo them in your abstract and conclusion, but never hide them at the end. We can look at a few examples from the humanities and the sciences. For example, humanities claim for significance. Let's examine a published example from Literary Criticism. John Kukic, writing in PMLA, argues that 19th century authors created a masochistic discourse that might seem like powerless, but is actually a form of power. So look at the 7 different types of claim for significance. The importance of this subject, how he addresses scholars and activists directly, how he corrects literature, how he shows findings shed new light beyond literature, how he aims to change common views of masochism, how he challenges scholarly theories of masochism, and how he demonstrates positive implication and makes recommendation for activism, all in one very important claims for significance. So what makes Kukic claims work? Major, multiple claims for significance in combination with strong arguments and evidence make a real difference in publication chances, especially in top journals. That's why it's important. Let's look at the sciences, claim for significance. In the sciences, claims for significance focus less on interpretation and more on illuminating human problem. You can consider the article examining pharmaceutical firms' cost in developing new drugs. He says, the article shows that firms' costs have increased alongside drug development failure rates. A substantial part of the introduction will argue that. And these are the 3 claims of that pharmaceutical article: audience-based claim, implication-based claim, and methods-based claim. In short, there has to be a section where the claims are made. So, the power of scaling up your claims. Scale up your framing. Don't just document increases in drug costs. Show how those costs shape the future of medical innovation. That's how it's done. No? Now, claims for significance don't require much space. That's why I'm also discussing it very quickly, not only because I've been pre-recording since this morning, but also because claims for because they just don't occupy a lot of space. They may only take a few sentences, but they're among the hardest to write. Focus at this point on clarity and even on placement, clarity and placement. Multiple claims. Organization is key. It's fine to have several claims, just organize them coherently. Group or nest them logically. Avoid overwhelming your reader with too much. Let's look at a case study where there's a multiple claim. No? Political theorist Desmond Jagmohan tailored this article on W.E.B. Du Bois for multiple audiences: African American thought and political theory, making his work relevant across fields. That's why it's very important to pay attention at that. Now, let's look at the so what exercise. Why it's hard to identify significance. The so what exercise, many writers, especially emerging scholars, find it incredibly difficult to identify why their research matters. As one graduate student put it, the so what question is the easiest question in the world to ask and the toughest question to answer. When we are immersed in our own work, we often lose sight on how it appears to others. We assume our readers see what's at stake when in fact they might not. The so what exercise helps us uncover those stakes and articulate the real world or intellectual significance behind our arguments. So, why need help identifying significance? There are three main reasons we struggle to identify significance on our own. First, our perspective is limited. We're too close to our project to see what will resonate with others. Novice scholars, in particular, may not know which questions their work could help answer. Second, there's the curse of knowledge. We find it hard to articulate what seems obvious to us and therefore forget to state it for others. The so what exercise exposes those blind spots for us. And third, we're simply too close to our work. Sometimes it takes another pair of eyes to spot what our work is really about. And this is the reason why we're encouraging dialogue with peers, because it can reveal the deeper implications we might have overlooked. Let's look at a student story. Here's a simple but powerful example. A student once told her advisor that she had no idea what her senior thesis was truly about. Her advisor calmly replied, "I know exactly what it's about. It's about death." That one word, death, completely reframed her project. It clarified her purpose and gave her writing cohesion. This story illustrates why we need outside perspectives. When we invite others to help identify what interests them in our work, we often uncover its core meaning and its claim to significance. So, what's this so what exercise? The so what exercise works like this. You explain your article to a partner and they repeatedly ask, "So what?" after each of your statements. Each time you have to go deeper, moving from the concrete details of your project to the abstract implications and ultimate value. It's an exercise in intellectual pressure, sometimes frustrating, even teeth-gnashingly so, but it's incredibly effective. By the end, you can decide which claims are strongest and most coherent for your article. So let's look at the so what exercise from science. This is a science-based example inspired by research lobbying and the US economy. My article is about the effect of business lobbying on the US economy. So what? Well, lobbying is a form of rent-seeking behavior, trying to gain benefits without producing anything. So what? That means lobbying redirects government money in inefficient projects. So what? So it redistributes money from productive to unproductive sectors. Notice what's happening here. The author starts with a narrow, descriptive claim and gradually moves towards a broader economic implication. So we can dig further. So digging deeper, you'd realize that terms the economy. So what? Economists didn't have a model for measuring this. My article provides one. So what? My model shows lobbying creates inequities in access to jobs and goods. So what? That damages democracy. By the end, the author has uncovered multiple levels of significance: economic, social, and also political. So what? I jumped a bit. Eventually, the conversation arrives at a long integrative claim. Many are concerned about the effects of lobbying, but lack tools to measure them. This article introduces a new economic model that shows how lobbying harms the economy, increases social inequalities, and weakens democracy. With this evidence, policy reform can be redesigned. This single paragraph now combines multiple claims, if you notice: audience-based, method-based, findings-based, implications-based, and recommendations-based. That's the power of the so what exercise. It turns a descriptive study into a transformative one. Now let's begin with another example, a criminology example based on research into urban video surveillance. The author begins plainly: my article is about police use of urban video surveillance. The reader pushes, so what? Through repeated questioning, the author moves from it's common now to it's used to keep some populations safe by excluding others. Soon, the conversation reveals that surveillance disproportionately targets and excludes homeless individuals. Which leads us to the second part. No? Another round of questioning exposes the next level. Urban surveillance doesn't actually improve safety. It's an expensive, ineffective tool that reinforces inequality. Finally, the author arrives at the big claim: we should stop using urban surveillance program. This progression transforms this one. We should stop urban video surveillance program. So this conversation transforms the argument from simple observation to powerful critique. The final claim reads: urban surveillance expands despite poor evidence of effectiveness. These programs exclude vulnerable populations and should be retrenched, not just because they restrict liberty, but because they don't work. It's strong, it's multidimensional, and persuasive, exactly what top journals are looking for. Let's look at a humanities example. Now let's turn to the humanities and we look at an example inspired by a scholar of German literature. The author begins modestly saying, My article is about an obscure German journalist who critiqued modernity. So what? Through the dialogue, the author realizes this journalist anticipated the ideas of Adorno and Horkheimer. Adorno and Horkheimer, key figures in 20th century thought. Even so what? That's what the reader says, and the author says that means we need to rewrite parts of 20th century intellectual history. Now, that's interesting, right? So what? So what are we saying? No? Now the article has moved from a narrow biography to a claim that reshapes our understanding of an era. Eventually, the author drafts this final claim. Intellectual historians often overlook women's contributions. This article demonstrates how Blanc, an obscure journalist, anticipated Adorno's and Horkheimer's critiques of modernity, reshaping our understanding of German intellectual history. By scaling up the claim, the article's value multiplies from interesting to essential. What is the point that I want to make? Give a feedback. Let's now shift from writing your own claims to helping others refine it. That's the reason why I'll ask you that as you write your paper, let others read it. No? You do not only work on it yourself, you need to help others read it and reflect on it. Learning to give feedback well is one of the most valuable skills you'll develop. Good feedback isn't about judgment, it's about helping others see possibilities in their work. That's how do you give feedback? I'd say start with the positive. Show enthusiasm and specificity and say, I loved your argument about X. It's not just good paper. Second, focus on your response. Explain what you understood and where you got lost. And third, frame suggestions as questions. Use redundant rather than this is redundant. It invites dialogue and maintains the author's authority. And finally, focus on large-scale issues like argument, structure, evidence, rather than small errors. This is something we need to learn. When we read others, we need to focus on the big, large-scale concerns, not the small-scale ones. So this is the guidelines that I just mentioned. Start with the positive, focus on response, always suggest, and focus on large-scale issues. One student noticed that her favorite advisor wasn't less critical. She was just encouraging. And she started every meeting with excitement about the paper's potential. The enthusiasm made all the difference. It transformed criticism into collaboration, and that's what good feedback should do. Empower, not deflate. Empower, not deflate. So what should we not do when giving a feedback? Avoid these traps. One, don't obsess over sources. Focus on what's done with the literature, not what's missing. Two, don't fixate on gaps. Every article has limits. Respect them. Three, don't rewrite the paper for the author. Fourth, don't judge. Harsh words like sloppy or nonsense shut down growth. Remember, you are a reader, not a judge. So do not judge. Huh? Now, what will you do if you're receiving feedback on the other hand? When receiving feedback, remember, give instructions. Let readers know what kind of feedback you want. Two, listen without defending. Take notes. Resist the urge to explain. Three, allow your feelings. It's okay to feel vulnerable. Acknowledge it. And four, separate delivery from content. Harshly delivered feedback can still be useful, so kindly delivered feedback can still be off base. But whatever feedback you hear from your classmates or colleague, always remember, you decide what to change. Feedback is valuable, but it's not binding. Even when mentors push hard, they're often brainstorming, helping you refine your thinking. Use their insights to clarify your purpose, but stay true to your voice. Every criticism is a chance to explain your ideas more clearly in your writing. That's why be grateful for the feedback. The more famous you become, the less feedback you receive. Even celebrated scholars like Benedict Anderson cherished receiving feedback and detailed feedback at that. It reminded them that critique is a gift. So appreciate this stage in the journey when peers still challenge you, question you, and help you grow. It's how you become not only a better writer, but also a more perceptive reader and thinker. So let's summarize your tasks, added tasks for this week, which we already explained at the beginning. Reading, engage deeply with what we spoke about. Draft your preliminary claims. Exchange, meet with your partner, read each other's work, and complete the so what exercise, which we've also demonstrated. Day 3, write, add, or refine your claims in your introduction and conclusion. And day 4 and 5, revise, incorporate the feedback, focusing on argument, citations, and significance. Each stage builds towards clarity and confidence in articulating why your research matters. This is the exercise, but I leave this to you to do on your own. Status check. At the week's end, pause to reflect. List your title, argument, evidence, target journals, writing schedule, actual time spent. This is not about self-critique. It's about self-awareness. Writing these details clarifies your progress and highlights where you need to focus next. By the end of the week, you will have accomplished something very significant. You've articulated why your work matters, shared it with peers, received constructive feedback, and began to revise strategically. These are essential scholarly skills: positioning, feedback, and revision. They mirror the real process of peer review, in fact. So take pride in this process. You're 3 weeks into the journey and you're building the mindset and the discipline that will carry you through the publication process. Keep writing, keep exchanging ideas, and most importantly, keep believing in the significance and the importance of your work. Thank you very much for listening. Let's wait for the last lecture for this week. Next.